So we're going to begin by going for refuge and then taking the precepts. So everyone chant with me. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dhammang saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Sanghang saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi sanghang saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi sanghang saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. To observe the 5 precepts, repeat after me. I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from killing beings.
abstaining from killing beings.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from stealing.
abstaining from stealing.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept
abstaining from sexual misconduct.
of abstaining from sexual
I
misconduct.
observe the precept of
I observe the precept
abstaining from telling lies.
of abstaining from telling lies.
I observe the precept of
I observe the precept of
abstaining from taking
abstaining from taking
intoxicating drinks and drugs
intoxicating drinks and drugs
with the refuge of the noble triple gem.
with the refuge of the
I
noble
observe
triple gem.
these precepts
I observe these precepts
for happiness in this life,
for happiness in this life,
for rebirth in heaven,
for rebirth in heaven,
to escape from the sufferings of samsara.
to escape from the
May
sufferings
it
of
help
samsara.
me and be a blessing.
May it help me and be a blessing.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So today, everyone, we're going to be discussing the first part of Dhammanupassana. So we've covered for the past, I think, more than a month or 2 months, we've been covering Satipaṭṭhāna, and now we've covered Kāyanupassana, Vedananupassana, Chittanupassana, and now we're on the fourth part, which is Dhammanupassana. So in the first part of Dhammanupassana, the first section is completely on the 5 hindrances. So when we say 5 hindrances, we're talking about the things that stop our mind from developing. So what does it mean our mind is not developing? It means, so let's say we're trying to, what does it mean to develop our minds? It means, let's say someone's trying to purify their minds. If someone's trying to purify their minds, that means they're trying to get rid of all the unwholesome things that come into their mind. Anger, lust, delusion. And as he's trying to purify his mind, there's things inside this mind that come up that prevent us from removing those things, that prevent us from purifying this mind. And those are what we call the 5 hindrances. Now, when we sit down to meditate, the reason we don't instantly get concentration, the reason we don't get instant samadhi, is because we have these 5 hindrances. They're always there. So what we are doing as we sit down and meditate is we're always trying to first suppress these 5 hindrances. It's after we suppress these hindrances, it's after we've lessened them to a certain extent that we can ever get or obtain samadhi. So today, we're going to be, so these are pretty much the enemies to developing one's mind. Now, let's say someone's a guard. Let's say you guys are now guards. You guys are doorkeepers. You have to prevent enemies from coming inside and make sure the city is secure. So then someone tells you, okay, on this day, there's going to be a male. A male is going to come wearing a red cap, and you have to make sure you stop him. Now you only know that this person is a male, and he has a red cap on. You don't know his height. You don't know what he looks like. You don't know his skin color. You don't know what kind of clothes he's wearing. So when this enemy comes, there could be 100 people wearing red caps. So when they all come, is it easy or is it difficult to identify who the enemy is? Since we don't know enough information, it's very, very difficult. Why? Because so many people wearing red caps. But once then they tell you some more information. Okay, this person is this skin color. He's wearing a white shirt, black pants. He's wearing these kinds of shoes. Now, as you know more details, now you get to identify that enemy further. Now you understand, okay, this person looks exactly like this. This person is going to come in this way. Then it's much more easy to identify the enemy and prevent him from coming. In the same way, it's the same thing with these hindrances. The more you understand what these hindrances are, how they arise, how they sustain themselves, how they stay in our minds, then the easier it is to abandon them, the easier it is to identify them, the easier it is to prevent them from arising. So today we're going to be learning exactly how these hindrances arise, what they're sustained on, and how it is we prevent them from arising. So I'm going to share screens. So can you guys see my screen? So the first hindrance is, it says, here a person understands that there's something called sensual desire within him. So what happens? Let's say we're going through our day and something called sensual desire arises within us. And what is sensual desire? Sensual desire is explained as anything that is pleasant and attractive, that is forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles. So throughout our day, really, whatever we see that we like, that's something that falls under sensual desires. So let's say we see our friends fall under, when we see our friends, if a happiness arises, when that kind of a pleasant experience arises within us, that's a form we see that causes us joy. So that falls under sensual desire. Then same with food. When we taste food, when we smell food, all those things fall under sensual desire. Even the comfort, let's say we lie down in bed after a long day's work, the comfort we experience from that bed falls under sensual desire. The comfort we experience from an air condition, that also falls under sensual desire. So even when we see our child, let's say someone's picking up their child from school, as soon as you drive up to the school and your child is coming out, the moment you see that child, maybe a happiness arises. That happiness arose through seeing a form. That also falls under sensual desire. So you can see how finely these things arise within us. So throughout our day, every time we see something, every time we hear something, most of our day is filled with thoughts of sensual desire. Then, or we think about, okay, how am I going to do this next? How am I going to get that next? Those thoughts are also based around getting more and more sensual desires closer to us. So This is a hindrance. Why is that? Because when we try to meditate, these thoughts arise within us. When we try to develop our minds, maybe we try to practice loving kindness. Then instead of loving kindness, you remember, okay, for lunch, I'm going to eat this. And then for dinner, I'm going to have this. That's an obstacle to us. Why? Because instead of focusing on loving kindness, now we're thinking about food. Then maybe you want to try to meditate and you remember your friends. I should call this person now. That's also a hindrance. Why is it bother to us developing our minds? So all these things, whatever pleasant forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles there are, all of those things fall under sensual desire. Those are all hindrances. So that's the first hindrance. The first hindrance is sensual desire. Those are all bothers to us. Then the Supreme Buddha explains the second hindrance. So if anyone doesn't understand these as I explain them, you can always ask a question in between. But the Buddha explains the second hindrance is, here a person has a thought of ill will. Now, a thought of ill will means he also recollects what? He recollects the same things. He recollects forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles. But this time, they're unpleasant, they're unattractive. So what happens? There's a conflict in his mind. When he sees that form, he gets angry, he gets upset. That thought is unpleasant to him. So in his mind, there's an internal conflict. That sound is unpleasant to him. That smell, that tangible, those are all unpleasant things. So for example, imagine you guys walk to your kitchen and someone has dirtied the kitchen and just left the mess there. The sink is full of stuff. And as soon as you see that form, as soon as you see that, what happens is an internal conflict. It happens in an instant. Instantly, ill will arises. We see a form and there's a conflict in our minds. Or maybe it is we're trying to develop our minds and maybe our back hurts. Maybe when we're sitting down, our back starts hurting. And instead of focusing on the meditation, we have to focus on the pain. So inside our mind, there's a conflict. Maybe we remember someone yelling at us. That sound then we experience is a conflict within our minds. Why? Because it's something unpleasant, unattractive to us. The same with, imagine someone doesn't have any money. Now that problem to him, like when he sees that he has no money, it's a conflict to his mind. It's something unpleasant. The same with sickness, illness, all of these things that we feel, these tangibles that we experience, those are all conflicts in our mind. If it's too hot to us, if the room is too hot, those are all conflicts. So whenever there's a conflict, whenever there's a form, a sound, a smell, a taste, a tangible that is unpleasant and unattractive to us, then inside our mind, ill will, the second hindrance, arises. So we sit down to meditate and we start remembering these things. This person did this to me. This person said that to me. But the kitchen was unclean. Or my back hurts. All of these fall under ill will, the second hindrance to us developing our minds. So far we covered. The first one is the same thing, the same five things: form, sound, smells, taste, and tangibles, but they're pleasant to us. Then the second one is the same five things, but they're unpleasant to us. They cause conflicts in our minds. Then the Buddha explains that there's a third hindrance, and that third hindrance is dullness and drowsiness. So I should tell you the Pali words for these as well. The first one is called 𝗾𝗺𝙗𝙩. Sensual desire is called 𝗾𝗺𝙗𝙩. Then the second one is called, he has vyapada, thoughts of ill will. So it's called vyapada. Then the third one is tīna-middha. So tīna-middha is two things. The first part is dullness. So dullness here means his mind doesn't want to meditate. His mind ends up giving excuses. Okay, maybe we should do this first, and then we'll do meditation. Then we'll develop our minds. So the first part is your mind making excuses. Then the second part is literally drowsiness. You feel sleepy. When you sit down to meditate, you start nodding. You start falling asleep. So that's also a hindrance. So dullness is one portion of that hindrance, and then drowsiness is the second part of that hindrance. So dullness means, so let's say you're sitting down and you want to do a meditation, but then your mind starts making excuses saying, okay, first, maybe we'll water the plants first, then we'll meditate. Or your mind says, okay, maybe I'll cook first, and then I'll meditate. And even so, this first part of that hindrance happens so finely within us that so sometimes we go to meditate and maybe you remember a Jataka story or a story that the Buddha taught, like a normal story, let's say. So there's one monk, when he would go to do meditation, his mind would say, okay, his mind would recollect Jataka stories. Now, this doesn't seem like a bad thing. Why? He's recollecting something the Buddha taught, a story of the Buddha's past life. But then after he realized that every time he tries to meditate, these kinds of thoughts will come up. So when he went and asked, he realized that what was happening was this hindrance, the first part, dullness was arising in his mind. Why? Instead of meditating, instead of doing what he's supposed to do at that time, his mind was saying, instead of practicing, instead of developing our minds, let's think of this instead. Let's think of that instead. So instead of doing the appropriate task, his mind would give him excuses or other thoughts to think about. So that happens very, very finely. So it's important for us to understand, okay, if my mind is making excuses, this is a hindrance. This is a bother to us. So those are all part of the first section, which is Tīna Middha, in the first part, which is dullness. And then drowsiness is that literally you fall asleep, you feel sleepy. So when you sit down, you should be aware, okay, I'm about to fall asleep. I feel sleepy. That comes through mindfulness, that comes through practice. After you practice meditation for a while, you can tell, okay, sleepiness is arising in me. As you become more aware of your mind, you'll be able to tell those things. Oh, this is about to start in me. Then the next hindrance, so far we've covered 3. Kama Chanda Vyapada Tīna Middha. Then the next hindrance is Uddacha Kukkucha, which is restlessness and remorse. So restlessness means his mind can't focus on one thing. It keeps switching from one object to another. So let's say even through meditation, let's say he tries practicing loving kindness. He does loving kindness meditation for 2 minutes, and then he switches to Anapanasati. Then Anapanasati doesn't work, then he switches to Asubha. Then Asubha doesn't work, so he switches to elements meditation. So what's the reason he's doing that? It's because his mind can't focus on one thing. So he thinks switching is the right way to go. But what's really happening is his mind is overcome by a hindrance. So the meditator has to realize, okay, right now my mind is restless. This is a hindrance. He has to see that first. Then can he get rid of that hindrance and practice removing that hindrance. Otherwise, he'll just keep switching back and forth and thinking he's doing something right. So the first part is restlessness. Then the second part is remorse. Now, remorse means, so this also happens very, very finely. So let's say someone's practicing Anapanasati. In Anapanasati, the only task you have to do in the beginning is to focus on your breath. Now, as he focuses on his breath, after 10 seconds, his mind switches to something else. Then he comes back, no, I have to focus on my breath. And then he keeps going for another 10 seconds. And then again, his mind switches. So what happens? He gets angry. He gets upset. Why is it my mind can't focus on one thing? He starts feeling regretful, thinking my mind is so weak that it can't focus on one thing for a long time. So what happens? Then that portion of that hindrance arises. Remorse arises. Why can't I focus? Why can't my mind focus on this task? Why can't my mind think about this meditation for this long? That's remorse. So we have to understand that's also a hindrance. And then the second part is of that same hindrance, of that same part about remorse, which is he thinks about things he did in the past that are evil. Maybe he's killed before, maybe he's stolen before. And then those thoughts come up. He starts thinking, okay, I've done these kinds of bad things, so I won't be able to concentrate my mind. So that's all under remorse. That's all under uddhacca kukkucca. So that's the fourth hindrance. So the first one is sensual desire. The second one is ill will. The third one is dullness and drowsiness. And then the fourth one is restlessness and remorse. So those two go together. And then finally, the last hindrance is doubt, vijikiccha. Now, doubt means he has doubt about the meditation, he has doubt about the teachings, he has doubt about the Buddha. All of these fall under doubt. So if someone has doubt, that means he gets questions like this. So as let's say he's doing the meditation, then thoughts arise in him thinking, am I supposed to be doing this right now? Is this the right step? What should I be doing next? How long should I do this step? How long should I do that step? So those kinds of thoughts all fall under doubt. That is also a hindrance. So whenever these 5 things are in our minds, it's impossible that we can ever develop our minds. So whenever a hindrance is in our mind, that means a wholesome state is not there. That means our mind isn't being purified. Whenever these hindrances aren't there, then he has developed a wholesome state. Then you can say his mind is being purified. So our goal is to identify that these hindrances are there, see the reason that they arise, and to remove them. So then we have to understand, why is it that these hindrances arise? So does anyone have any questions so far on what we've learned? Is anyone confused on any of these? Vishaka, you understood everything? So then we're going to discuss, since no one has any questions, how is it that these hindrances arise? So when we talk about sensual pleasure, the Buddha teaches the reason sensual pleasure arises is, or sensual desire arises is, thoughts of sensual desires arises, he has unwise consideration. And he takes the sign of the beautiful. So really, it's very hard to translate this in another way, but in Pali it's called subha nimitta. He takes the aspect that something is beautiful. So for example, when instead of seeing a tree as something that's impermanent, that's something that dies, that's something that ceases to be, that changes, he takes it as this is something beautiful, that has to stay the same way. So as soon as he sees that, he thinks, I should have this kind of plant. I'm going to put this kind of plant in this corner. I'm going to buy this kind of flowers to decorate here. Then it's going to stay beautiful like that for a long time. So as soon as he sees that, so as soon as he walks by a flower shop, what happens now? He gets a thought of sensual desire. So yes, so someone asked, Namo Buddhaya Swaṅ is Yoniso Manasikara depend on the hindrances. So unwise consideration is Ayoniso Manasikara. That's Ayoniso Manasikara. Yoniso Manasikara is the opposite of this. If he had Yoniso Manasikara, then the hindrance wouldn't arise. Why? Because he would see, okay, this is something impermanent. This isn't something I should get attached to. This is something that will change. Then he won't take the sign of the beautiful. Why? Instead of, when he sees that object, he sees impermanence. When he sees something that looks nice, maybe he takes asubha. He takes the sign that is impure. When he sees something that's beautiful, he takes the idea that this is made up of the 4 great elements. So those kinds of thoughts arise with wise consideration. So whenever unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful, or when we take the sign of the beautiful, then that sensual desire, thoughts of sensual desire has nutriment, it has food. That thought will flourish, that thought will grow. For example, that thought has a reason to arise. Okay, so what's the cause for a thought of sensual desire to arise? The cause is unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful. Okay. Okay, so someone asked, Science, could you please explain that again? So let's say someone has a thought. So let's take a very, very simple example. Let's say you guys, in front of you is your favorite dish of food now. Okay, your kottu or your pasta or whatever it is you guys like. Now there's a dish of that food in front of you on the table. Now when you see that food, I'm not saying you shouldn't eat, but first what happens, a thought arises of us thinking, wow, this is something delicious, this is something that looks good, this is something that I want to eat. And what arises? A thought of sensual desire arises. That means a thought. So first we see it, and a thought based on craving arose because a pleasant feeling arose in our minds. So that is something, that is a thought based on sensual desire. That's the first hindrance. But what's the reason that thought arose? The reason is we have unwise consideration and we took the sign of the beautiful. That means when we saw that food, we thought, this is something delicious, this is something I'm going to experience and give me pleasant feelings. But we didn't consider, as soon as I chew this food, as soon as I have that first mouthful, all that that beauty of that food is going to go away in an instant. That food is going to mix with my saliva, is going to get crushed inside my mouth between my teeth. Then as soon as I swallow, it's going to mix with the bile inside my stomach. It's going to become looking nasty. It's going to look like dog vomit. If we looked at the food that way, if we looked at the food as something that is only there to nourish him, then that craving, that sensual desire wouldn't arise in him. But since we take the aspects as we take things in the world with unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful, then sensual desire arises. So the cause of sensual desire is unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful. So the effect is thoughts of sensual desire. When the cause, unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful is there, then the effect, which is thoughts of sensual desire, that will also be there. So it's cause and effect. Does that make sense? So the food for sensual desire is unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful. Does that make sense? Do you guys understand that? Because this explanation is the same for the rest. So if you guys understand the first one, then you guys can grasp the concept of the other four. So if someone continues to think with unwise consideration and continues to take the sign of the beautiful of that same thing, then more and more thoughts of sensual desire will arise in him. They won't ever go away. As long as these two things are there, thoughts of sensual desire will be there because it's cause and effect. Okay, I'm going to explain this again. Now, let's say, I'll give an example. Let's say you guys are lying in bed. The more you think, this bed is so comfortable, I don't ever want to get up, I'm going to fall asleep. The more you think thoughts like that, the more you think that this is something that's comfortable and nice, that falls under unwise consideration and taking the sign of the beautiful. While you're thinking this is something pleasant, this is something that won't change, this is something that's permanent. As you take those signs, then thoughts like, oh, I should just lie here for a long time, I should sleep more, 1 more hour, all those thoughts will continue to be there. Then you remember, as soon as I go home from work, I'm going to sleep. Those thoughts will arise. Why? Because of unwise consideration, and you took the sign of the beautiful. Does that make sense? If someone wants to get rid of sensual thoughts of sensual desire, then he has to do wise consideration, and he has to he has to see that the true nature of things. Then that thought will disappear. So I'll explain how we get rid of these thoughts as well. But for now, understand that as long as we have ayoniso manasikare and subha nimitta, or unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful, then no matter what we do, no matter what we say, no matter what it is we can do, these thoughts of sensual desire will arise in us. Why? Because unwise consideration is there, and we're taking the sign of the beautiful. Does that make sense? So, okay, for example, let's say, I'll give you another very, very simple example. You see someone smiling. You see someone smiling and think, wow, that person has a beautiful smile. Okay, so what did you do? You took his smile as something beautiful. That came with unwise consideration. Why is that? Because did craving increase or decrease when we say his smile is so beautiful? Craving within us increased. That is a thought connected with sensual desire. So then what's the opposite of that? The opposite is wise consideration and not taking the sign of the beautiful. So what does he say? That smile is just a bunch of teeth that are in a row together. That's just some teeth I'm looking at. That's the true nature of that smile. The true nature, this is just some teeth. I shouldn't get attracted to this. This is something impermanent. These teeth are going to fall out. They're going to turn yellow. They're going to break. This isn't something to be attracted to. As soon as he thinks that, then craving decreases within him. So what happened there? That's a thought connected not with sensual desire. That's a thought connected with asubha. It's a thought connected with seeing the impurities, seeing the true nature of this body. So that thought is connected with wise consideration and taking the sign or taking the true nature of that object, seeing the true nature of that object. Does that make sense? So I hope you understood that. We're gonna move, then now we're gonna move, okay, everyone understood, right? I'm gonna move on to the next one. Then the second one is, so that's the food, that's the cause for thoughts of sensual desires arising. Then what's the cause of ill will arising in our minds? The cause of ill will is unwise consideration and the sign of the repulsive, or we say patiga nimitta. So ayoniso manasikare plus patiga nimitta means you have a thought of ill will. So here, this is a very, very easy example. Can you guys all read this? You guys can all read that, right? What does it say? It says the letters in the shapes, you're stupid. Now, did any of you here get angry at this? You guys are smiling. So what's the reason you guys aren't mad saying, oh, Swayamasa called us stupid. How can he say that? Why did he say that? That's not something nice to say. Why isn't it you guys didn't get angry right now? What's the reason? You guys, there's no sign of the repulsive here. But let's say now, instead of me saying this, you guys see these same letters, these same words on your Facebook page. Someone, the person you dislike the most in your life has now written on your picture, wow, this person looks so stupid, or you're stupid. Now what happens? It's the same letters. The letters haven't changed. The words are the same. The shapes are the same. But now what happens? Now unwise consideration and the sign of the repulsive is there. So what happens? Then there's a conflict in our mind. How dare he call me stupid? Why did he call me stupid? This person is the person who's stupid. And then we say, wow, that person called me stupid. This person is not a nice person. And so forth. Then anger arises. Why? Because we've given ill will food. We fed it. Imagine there's a fire and we keep throwing in fuel. We keep throwing in logs. We keep throwing in dry grass. What happens? The flames increase. The fire increases. So in the same way, that thought of ill will didn't just spontaneously arise in us. It didn't just come out of nowhere. It came because of unwise consideration and the sign of the repulsive. So as long as someone continues to think unwisely, as long as he continues to take the sign of the repulsive, those thoughts of ill will increase. More and more thoughts like that will arise. It's impossible for him to get rid of those things. As long as these two things are there, as long as he keeps giving it food, then those thoughts will increase more and more. Does that make sense? Then we're going on the third one. Vishak, you have a question?
Can Sansa give another example for this?
Okay, so let's say you walk into the kitchen and now there's a mess in the kitchen. Someone's used cups, they used plates, they've cooked, now there's food everywhere, and they just left it like that and left. As soon as we see that form, what happens? There's a conflict in our minds. Why? Then what is it? We took the sign of the repulsive and we took unwise consideration, which is now thoughts like this arise, which is, how could this person leave this like this? This person's so careless. This person doesn't have any kind of respect for anyone. And we get angry. The reason that thought of anger arose is because of unwise consideration and the patica nimitta, the sign of the repulsive. So let's say Arhat Sariputta walks to that kitchen. Arhat Sariputta is someone who's free from the 5 hindrances. He's completely removed them. Then he sees the same thing. He sees someone has left the kitchen a mess. That hasn't changed. Someone's used all the dishes, someone's thrown food everywhere. But for him, thoughts like, how dare this person do this? How could this person's so stupid, this person's so careless, those thoughts don't arise. Anger doesn't arise. Why is that? Because unwise consideration is completely removed. The sign of the repulsive is completely removed. What does he come to? He comes to upekkha, equanimity. He thinks maybe, or he comes to maybe seeing good qualities in that person. Maybe this person ran out of time. Maybe he was in a rush. Maybe this person forgot. Maybe he had to suddenly go to the washroom. Maybe he'll come back and clean it. What I should do is I should help this person. I'll clean this up. Then that person saves time. Then the next person who comes to this kitchen won't see this mess. He'll have a pleasant side. Does that make sense? So what happens to us right now, as soon as we see something, instantly we're on our nature is to start yelling at that person and start getting angry. Why? Because that's what we've been practicing for so long. But now, as soon as we see something, as soon as we hear something, as soon as we smell something, we have to take a step back and slowly think, okay, right now, based on a sound, based on a smell, based on a form, anger has arisen. Why has anger arisen? Is because because there's unwise consideration, and I've taken the sign of the repulsive here. This is just a form I'm seeing. This is just a sound. As he does that, then he's considering wisely. He abandons this. He starves the fire. He starts throwing in, there's no more wood. There's no more grass. So then the fire doesn't have any fuel. So it quenches. It dies off. Does that make sense? So that's the fuel, or that's the nutriment for ill will, unwise consideration, and the sign of the repulsive. Then we come to the third one, which is tīna-middha. Now, this picture looks funny, but this is actually stated in the Buddhist teachings, which is the first part. So the first part is dullness. So dullness here means, again, thoughts like okay, I'll do this in 5 minutes. Maybe after I watch this part, I'm gonna go sit down and meditate. After I work on this, I'm gonna read a Dhamma book. His mind continually makes excuses. So that the reason those thoughts arise is because of unwise consideration and thinking about things that lead to dullness and drowsiness. So for the drowsiness portion, in the Buddha's teachings, it says when he stretches his arms out, when he yawns, all of those things, as he does those, it increases his sleepiness. So the more the person thinks, I'm tired, I can't do this right now, I'm too tired, I did this much work today, I did that much work today. As the more of those thoughts that arise, the more he thinks in that way, then he can't get rid of that hindrance. He can't get rid of dullness and drowsiness. Those thoughts will keep arising. So what does he have to do? He has to abandon those thoughts. He has to think, no, I shouldn't. As soon as he has thought like that, he should abandon it. When he abandons it, then he can come back to abandoning that hindrance, which is restlessness. Sorry, not restlessness, which is dullness and drowsiness. Okay? Someone asked, unwise consideration and wise consideration. Does it arise because of habit? Since we are trying to remove ill will, looks like we need to stop feeding it with wise consideration. But where does wise consideration come from? Does it automatically come? When we keep practicing it, should we consciously bring in wise consideration every time we have the sign of the repulsive? Yes. So all of these things, all 5 hindrances arise due to unwise consideration. If someone at any moment has wise consideration, then it's impossible that this hindrance will arise. Why? Because the food it needs, the fuel it needs is not there. If this is gone, then he's doing something correct. And I'll explain how it is we do wise consideration in just after I cover these. Then you'll understand what it is we actually have to do to abandon these hindrances. So this is the food, this is the nutriment for dullness and drowsiness. The more you crack your arms, the more you stretch and yawn, the more sleepy you'll feel. The more you make excuses in your mind, the more you are unlikely to start doing wholesome things. Okay? Then for uddhaca kukkucca, which is restlessness and remorse, the more this person has unwise consideration and he has thoughts that unsettle his mind, the more he has those things, then the more food that hindrance has. So the more he keeps switching from a meditation to another meditation, the more restless he becomes. The more he starts thinking about, I did this 5 years ago, I did this bad thing 2 years ago, I did this, will I be able to do, I did this bad thing. The more he keeps thinking thoughts like that, the more remorseful he'll become. The more that hindrance becomes powerful. So what does he have to do? He has to abandon those thoughts. As he abandons those thoughts, then that hindrance will subside. Okay? Now I'm covering these quickly because of our time constraints here. And then finally, so that's the food, that's the nutriment for restlessness and remorse. The more he has unwise consideration, the more he thinks about those kinds of thoughts, the more it'll increase. And then finally, for doubt, the food and the nutriment for doubt is unwise consideration and things that cause doubt. Now, things that cause doubt here means he hasn't learned the Dhamma properly. He hasn't studied the Dhamma. He hasn't asked questions. So what happens? When he doesn't understand something, he starts questioning himself. He starts questioning something. Instead of clearing it out, he starts thinking of himself. He starts thinking the answer is himself. Instead of completely understanding how it is to do a step, he doesn't do that. So then questions arise in him. So the more he questions himself, the more he thinks about things that cause doubt, the more doubt increases. So for example, there's one monk. Now this monk, he read a sutta, and the sutta was very, very like there was an explanation on why sometimes we don't see the moon. Okay, sometimes there's the moon, we can't see the moon, right? So the explanations were like, now I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was like sometimes clouds cover the moon, sometimes there's dust in the sky, sometimes Rahu, the titan, the asura, captures the moon. That's what it says in the discourse. Now, does this, and then it goes on to explain in the same way, these unwholesome states disappear from a monk because of these reasons. Now, the important part of that discourse is the second half, which is what's the reason that these wholesome states disappear? But instead of focusing on that, this monk, thoughts like this arose. Hey, how come an eclipse isn't listed here? How come it doesn't say the sun covers the moon sometimes? So what happens? Thoughts of doubt started arising in this monk. Instead of focusing on what's important, he started focusing on something completely useless. And instead of asking someone how it is to overcome this doubt, he kept thinking thoughts in that way. So what happened? His doubt increased. Then as soon as that doubt increased, he started looking at the discourses with suspicion. And then more and more doubt increased. So then the only way that monk was able to recover from those kinds of thoughts is by asking elder monks or wise monks, I had a question in this way, this kind of thought occurred to me, how do I abandon this? And when he received the answer, this isn't something that's important to Nibbana, you should be focusing on this if you don't understand something, then he was able to abandon those thoughts and again focus his mind on practicing the Dhamma. So whenever we have things in our mind that cause doubt, we should always ask questions, we should always read the Dhamma to completely understand how it is we do something, how it is we practice something, and how it is we overcome this hindrance. And then, so I'm going to explain now, how does the Buddha teach us to overcome these hindrances? So I'm going to go through these quickly. So we talked about this thoughts of sensual desire. How is it we abandon these kinds of thoughts? We do the opposite. We don't take the sign of the beautiful and we come to wise consideration. So wise consideration and some kind of Dhamma reflection. So again, we said, remember when we said we see a smile, someone takes it as asubha, he practices repulsive impurities meditation, the impurities of this body. When he reflects that way, he has wise consideration and he's taking the true nature of this body. That's his perception at that moment. So let's say someone has someone told me they have sometimes this one upasika, she really liked cars and she wanted to buy a certain model of car. But after a while, she thought this car is something impermanent. One day it will rust away and it will degrade and be destroyed. So then she was able to abandon that desire, those kinds of thoughts of sensual desire based around that car by not taking the sign of the beautiful and using wise consideration. So she was able to abandon that thought by recollecting impermanence and wise consideration. Does that make sense? So there with Yoniso Manasikara, she was able to do impermanence meditation. Based on that, she abandoned that thought of sensual desire. Then the same for ill will. Remember those words that we saw that it says you're stupid? Instead of taking the sign of the repulsive, you take it with wise consideration. These are just some letters formed in this certain way. So there's nothing to be angry about. That's also wise consideration. He doesn't take this as he's yelling at me. He's yelling at, he's making fun of my friends. He's making fun of my family. He detaches. He's just yelling at, he's written words on a picture. He's written words on a post. It has nothing to do with me. Or maybe he thinks this person is the owner of his kamma. Whatever kamma he collects, he will take with him. Whatever kamma I collect, I will take with me. As he considers that, then he doesn't get angry. Why? Because if he gets angry, then who's going to take that karma? He's going to take that karma. Those thoughts of anger, the bad karma he gets from that, he'll take with him. So then he abandons that thought of ill will. So that comes with wise consideration and not taking the sign of the repulsive. And then for Tīna Midda, which is dullness and drowsiness, the Buddha explains this person can think, today I might die, tomorrow I might die. You only get a chance to abandon, you only get a chance to practice the Dhamma in a Buddha's dispensation. So if I died right now, who knows where I'll end up going? So instead of being lazy, instead of putting it off in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, instead of putting off my Dhamma practice for a future time, I should practice this now. Instead of sleeping, I should practice this now because I won't get this chance again. When he thinks in this way, when he puts in effort, when he arouses effort, energy, and along with wise consideration, then he's able to overcome dullness and drowsiness. So this recollection of death and thinking about the rarity of the Buddha's dispensation, those are both there to increase effort, to increase energy, to increase striving. So with energy and effort and striving and wise consideration, he can overcome dullness and drowsiness. And then for restlessness and remorse, what he can do is, so normally we're restless because sometimes we have responsibilities and we think, okay, how am I going to do this now? Then after I meditate, I'm going to have to go shopping, and then I have to finish my report, and then I have to do this. So instead of thinking in that way, what he can do is, for these next 20 minutes, I'm going to set aside to meditate. I'm going to set aside to develop my minds. So then for these next 20 minutes, I don't need to think about anything else. Why? Because I'm going to be sitting here anyways and not doing anything. So there's no point thinking about those things. In 20 minutes, I'll start thinking about them again. Then he sets aside those responsibilities for 20 minutes and focuses on developing his mind. That gives his mind a chance to relax, to calm down, and to again think about one thing for that length of time. And then what else he can do? He can practice seeing that hindrance. He can practice seeing, okay, my mind is restless right now. This is a hindrance. This is something that's a bother. When my mind is constantly changing what it's thinking about, I can't focus. So then I should try to calm my mind. I try to relax my mind. And then he tries to bring his mind to concentrate on one thing again. That also helps him to overcome that hindrance. And then for remorse, he has to think, in the past, I did this. Okay, in the past, yes, maybe I killed animals. In the past, maybe I drank. In the past, maybe I lied. But now I'm starting anew. I'm starting afresh. This is a new journey in my life. I'm abandoning those things and I'm starting anew. So those are all in the past now. I can't change them. Those are all finished. I can't go back and undo those things. But all I can do is start from fresh. I can start anew. So from that thought, he can progress. Whenever those thoughts in the past come, he just pushes them aside, thinking, those are all finished now. They're all done. I can't change those. There's no point thinking about things I can't change. I can only work towards getting a better future, into changing myself. Then with wise consideration and that kind of thinking, he's able to abandon thoughts of remorse. When thoughts of remorse arises that he can't meditate, that his focus keeps changing, then he thinks, no, I'm seeing a hindrance. I'm seeing something that's bothering my mind. That's part of developing my mind. The more I see it, the more I eliminate this kind of enemy, the more I eliminate this kind of hindrance, the more I develop my mind. So seeing that your mind can't focus is an important part of developing the mind. So then he doesn't have thoughts of remorse when he thinks in that way. So to abandon restlessness and remorse, he thinks those kinds of thoughts, and he has to use wise consideration as well. And then finally, for doubt, in order to remove doubt, there's only two ways, which is you have to yourself, and this is the one that we recommend, which is you should yourself read the Buddha's teachings. You should yourself read the Buddha's Dhamma, open the actual suttas, not go on forums, not go online, and not go on websites where other people explain the Buddha's teachings. You should yourself open the Buddha's sutta books where the discourses are there, and you should read them. There's a meditation you wish to learn, you should read on that meditation, what the Buddha taught. Then you have a clear understanding of how it is you're supposed to practice it. And then if you still have questions, that's when you go and ask the Sangha, how did the Buddha explain this here? How did the Buddha explain that here? What does this mean? What does that mean? When you ask questions in that way, then those doubts that have arisen are removed. Then you're able to clearly understand what it is you're supposed to do, and you're able to take the next step forward. But it's important that you've read the suttas, it's important that you've read the discourses, because that way you can understand, okay, what this person is saying makes sense. Okay, what this person is saying matches the Dhamma. Otherwise, you come into all kinds of wrong view. So not everyone explains. I'm not saying this to bash anyone or to put anyone down, but not everyone understands or explains the Dhamma in the same way. So it's important for us to read the discourses so we can compare if what this person is saying in the what this person is saying matches what the Buddha taught. Only then can we, if it matches what the Buddha taught, then we can accept it. If it doesn't match, you should abandon it immediately. Why? Because coming to wrong view is very, very dangerous. Coming to wrong view is very, very it's much greater hindrance to our progression in the Dhamma than anything else. So always, you guys should yourself be reading these suttas, these discourses, and you should yourself have a good Dhamma knowledge. That way you can yourself understand clearly what it is you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to practice. And then when doubts and questions arise, then you can work on abandoning and clearing those doubts by asking questions. How is this? How is that? And then you can have a clear understanding of what it is you're supposed to do. Does that make sense? So those are the 5 hindrances. And so we talked about how those hindrances arise, what the food is for those hindrances. We talked about how we abandon those hindrances, how we get rid of those hindrances. And now, since we have a few minutes, maybe we can practice seeing those hindrances. Okay, maybe before we do that, we can ask if does anyone have any questions. Someone asked, 𝘾𝙤𝙣𝙣 in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, in the 4th one, it's called mental states. So the Dhammanupassana is split into different parts. So there's the first section is called Nivaraṇa Pabbang, which means the section on the hindrances. So that section deals with the 5 hindrances. And then in same Dhammanupassana, there's Khanda Pabbang, which is section on the aggregates, which is the 5 aggregates of clinging. So I'm not sure what it is you're referring to. But the first section in Dhammanupassana is the 5 hindrances. And then someone asks, Bante, could you recommend a book for sutra and discourses? So in English, if you have access, if you are able to, Bhikkhu Bodhisattva's translation of the Sutra Pitaka is by far the best translation I found. It's the most accurate English translation that I found. There's lots of corrections, but there are certain parts that are you have to take with a grain of salt, and especially if there's numbers. In any English translation, whoever the translator is, if there's numbers in that discourse, you will have to double check with the Buddha Jayanti books, which is the books that they translated using like a committee translated into Sinhala and Pali. So look at the Pali and then again look at the definition using a dictionary if there's numbers. But the best translation is in English is Bhikkhu Bodhisattva's translation of the Sutta Pitaka. So that's Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya. Those maybe we can send a link to those books, Vishaka, if you can find them, or Hansaja, if you can find them. That's the best translation. Some of the other translations I've seen, some of the wording is incorrect. So for example, there's in Sutta Central, there's so someone sent a Sutta Central link here to Bhikkhu Bodhisattva's translations, but not all the suttas are available on this site. Whatever you can see that's available, you should read. But so for example, in there's another translation by Bhikkhu Sujato, but there are some parts which are I'm not saying they're directly wrong, but it's hard to see how the translation is correct, because for example, in Anapanasati, in the part where it says Digang va Sasanto va, that part says he breathes in roughly, when it should say he breathes in long. So long and hoarse or a rough breath is completely two different things. You guys understand what I'm saying? So if someone read that, he might get the wrong idea. So Bhikkhu Bodhisattva's is what I recommend. In Sinhala, Lokuswaminga's translations are there available on Tripitaka.online. Can we send that link as well? I'll try to find it as well. That has the translation in Sinhala. It's very, very easy language to understand. Even if someone's a beginner in Sinhala, yeah, someone said the link. So Tripitaka.online is that all the translations of the Sutta Pitaka are there. And someone said Bhante, Sutta Friends is a good one as well. Yes, so Sutta Friends is the retranslation of the same suttas in a way that's easier to understand. So Sutta Friends is also good as well. But I think not all the suttas are on Sutta Friends, right? Only a few are there. Most are probably there, but again, so those are the two that I recommend. In English, Bhikkhu Bodhisattva's and Sutta Friends has a good translation as well. In Sinhala, Buddha Jayanti books are there, and Lokuswaminga's translation on Tripitaka.online. That's what I recommend. Because both of these translations, whether it's English, so when you compare, they match. So then you can understand two completely, all three of them are very, very close to each other. So then you can understand, okay, so a committee completely translated the books, then Lokuswaminga also translated the book, Bhikkhu Bodhisattva translated the books, three separate sources translated the books, and they all came to very much the same idea, to very much the same translation. Then when you read it, you understand, okay, what this is saying is mostly correct. So I say mostly correct because to translate the Buddha's teachings into English is very, very difficult, because English simply doesn't have the words for it. For example, like in Pali, we have the word Vijnane Mano Chitta. So in Sinhala, we say Vijnane Manasa Sita. But in English, there is no word. We have consciousness for Vijnane, Mano, which is mind, and then Chitta doesn't have a word. There's no word for Chitta. In English, no one's ever talked about Chitta. No one's ever talked about that kind of aspect of the mind, because English didn't develop along with Buddhism. English developed along with other religions. So English doesn't have that foundation for these words. So it's very difficult. You have to make new words. So in these translations, you find the word mentality. Mentality used for the word chitta. Now, when you read that, what does that even mean? Mentality, you have to read the Pali and understand, okay, this is the word that is replacing the word chitta here. So in English, that's why I said, in English, some of these, like for example, bhava. The word bhava is sometimes translated as the word being, but that doesn't give the full meaning of the word bhava. The full meaning of the word bhava is a sentence, which is karma that forms to bear fruit. So in that would be a correct translation of the word bhava. But you can't write that sentence out every single place. So as a translation, the translators use the word being. But being, that English word being, doesn't give the full meaning there. So that's why you have to compare sources. You have to look at different books to understand what it is this word being or this word bhava is explaining here. Does that make sense? So that's my recommendations. Swaingas, why do they use the term frames of references when they are talking about Satipaṭṭhāna? I'm not sure where you're reading that. Could you be more specific? So someone is just telling us, does chitta mean intention? Chitta does not mean intention. Chitta, there's no word in English. I can't tell you the word in English because there is no word. Chitta is so in one discourse the Buddha teaches, if someone is talking about viññāne, if someone is talking about mano, if someone is talking about chitta, which is consciousness, mind, and mentality, they're really talking about the same thing. So chitta is something that goes very, very similar to mind. But I can't explain to you any further than that because there's no word for me to explain. Just think of it as equal or very, very close to mind. And then, okay, something you can, yeah, Vishak, you can share that link as well. And then someone asked, may I ask your opinion about access to insight.org? I think I've read on this as well. I would say the translation, if you can understand it, is pretty this is Swaingas, his translation is easy to understand as well. I forgot his name. Tanisaro, I think. I don't know. I'm not sure what his Swaingas' name was, but that Swaingas' translations are good as well. But you have to be very, very careful when you find translations, especially in English, because there's sometimes. So, for example, a very, very famous translation of the Sutta Pitaka by a organization called PTS, Pali Text Society. They're like the leading translations from Pali to English. They have the Pali text like books from like a long times ago in their libraries. They have good translations, but sometimes their translations are from a Western perspective. So sometimes the things explained in the books, sometimes explained in the teachings, it's hard to translate those things with a Western perspective. Why? Because that culture isn't there, that understanding isn't there, how the people behaved isn't there. So that translation isn't perfect. Sometimes the words they used are based on words that are used in other religions. For example, holy, for example, the words that are used are very, very like it's hard to understand, get an understanding of those words from an Eastern perspective. That's why the translations from Asia that came from Asia is much more I would say, accurate, only because that culture is there. So when some of these rituals are explained, that since literally some of those rituals still happen today, people still stand on one foot and try to realize the Dhamma. People still try to, there's still people trying to give pain to this body and realize the Dhamma. That culture is still there in the East, but that culture is not there in the West. So some of these rituals, the explanations, maybe those are from a Western perspective. So it's hard for them to understand. Some of the translations are really wrong in some perspective, in some areas, or they try to make everything equal, like everything should be the same, it should be fair, but you can't do that. You have to only translate it as it is. You can't add your own perspective into it. That's why Bhikkhu Bodhiswami's translation is very, very good. There's some parts, like he translated completely as the Pali said. So remember I said you shouldn't take the numbers? I said that because in the Western world, there is no idea, there's no usage of the word koti, which means 10 million. We use you go 1,000, a million, and then so forth, right? 3 zeros. But in India at the time, they used the word koti. They went from, they used that as a denominator, that means 10 million. But the translations, so since they didn't have an understanding of that, when they translated, they would put 100,000, they would a million, they would put 100 million, but those numbers are wrong. So in the end, when they get the figure, when they say the figure, the Buddha can see 100 million worlds, that figure is wrong. Why? Because they translated the word, the number incorrectly. It should be a billion instead of 100 million. Does that make sense? So there's some differences like that, but I'd say those books, you're safe. Bhikkhu Bodhiswami and Sutta Friends, you're good to go. Shavina, you have a question? What's the first name?
Namo Buddhaya Swamin Wahanse. This is Savin's mom, Avasarai. I just when you I've heard Swamin Wahanse like apparently our Pali library is now in London. Is that true? When will we ever get our Pali? How? I mean, I don't understand.
So for example, when Bhikkhu Bodhiswami translated the Tripitaka, or not the Tripitaka, the Sutta Pitaka, he has to look, he has to reference something, right? So it's not just, he has to reference the translation, the Pali, and then he has to translate it. So those Pali translations are split around the world. There's a Burmese edition, there's a Sinhala edition, there's a Hindi edition, there's an English edition. So that English edition is what's there in PTS, I believe, in London. So sometimes the translations aren't all equal. Like even the Pali, sometimes it says, for example, there's one part where it says, in one sutta, it says, Ananda Swami goes to see the Prince Lichavis, okay, and they're shooting bows. So they're shooting arrows, and they're shooting those arrows, and then he comes and tells the Buddha that he saw this incident, that they're very, very skilled at shooting bows. And then the Buddha says, Ananda, what do you think's harder? Splitting a horse hair into 7 pieces and using one of those pieces to split another piece, or what they were doing? And then Ananda Swami says, splitting a horse hair with another horse hair is very, very difficult. It's almost impossible. So in that phrase, it says 7 pieces, splitting a horse hair into 7. That's in the English version. In the PTS one, it says that. And then in the Burmese or the Myanmar edition or whatever, it says 100 pieces. In the Sinhala edition, it says 100 pieces. And in the Thai one, it says 100 pieces. Then what does the translator have to do? He has to compare all 4 And he has to have a good understanding of all 4 languages. He has to know Thai, he has to know English, he has to know Sinhala, he has to know Burmese. And then he sees, okay, these 3 are saying 100. Then he takes 100 as his translation. Does that make sense? And sometimes he has to refer to the commentaries. He has to read the Atuava and see, okay, in the commentaries it's explained in this way. Then he uses the commentary to figure out what the translation is saying. So it's very, very difficult. So the Buddha Jayanti books took 30 years to translate. There's a committee of people who every time someone translated a single section, they would read that section over and over again. Like 5 people would read it. Then they would pass it on to another person who would compare it with the commentaries. Then they would compare it with the all 4 languages. Then only got a seal of approval and said, okay, this is the word of the Buddha. It took 30 years. So it's not anyone can translate the Pali into like not anyone can translate the Buddha's teachings. You can't just pick up a book and start translating. You have to do so much comparisons. You have to read so much, to research, to understand the culture, to understand how people behaved in the Buddhist times, how they spoke the language. So, for example, imagine someone said, oh, you're so stupid, versus how stupid are you? In Pali, it's all mixed up. Then you have to understand, is this person yelling at that person, or is this person just saying it as a joke? That comes with knowing the culture. So sometimes, because of that cultural or lack of knowledge in the culture, sometimes the translation comes a bit different. Does it make sense? So there's so many complications, so many difficulties that arise when translating the word into Pali, from Pali to another language. So a lot of times, that's why Buddha Jayanti, all the books have 1 page Pali, the next page is translation. Next page Pali, next page translation. So that person who's reading it can always refer to the Pali text, and then he can see what's it saying himself if he's unsure. Someone asked, Navodaya Swami, is it okay to use these PDFs, or is it like stealing? I think it's okay. I think Bhikkhu Boy Sanghas has given, like Bhikkhu Boy Sanghas himself doesn't. I'm not sure. I'll ask and then I'll let you guys know next week. So this person sent a link of these books that are the PDFs. As far as I know, it's okay because it's not like we're not stealing from anyone. But I'll double check and ask. And someone asked, so Angla says access to insight. In access to insight, they say Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the great frames of reference, translated. So that's why I said this translation is here. It says the translation is for Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is the great frames of reference. I have no idea why they translated it like that. That doesn't make any sense to me. What I should say is the establishments of mindfulness. Because this is what your mind, like this is what not foundation, but what you establish yourself on to develop mindfulness. Okay, so how about before you guys ask any more questions, how about we take until 9:30, we practice trying to see within ourselves these hindrances and trying to practice abandoning them, trying to recollect how they arise and seeing them, like trying to suppress them yourselves. Now, this is the practical part. So if you guys, this is going to be difficult to do if you don't have an understanding of these completely. So go back and watch this video once if you don't understand, or research on it or read more on it and then practice. But for now, just try to see. We're going to practice Anapanasati meditation and try to see, okay, now a thought of sensual desire has arisen. Now a thought of ill will has arisen. Now I'm feeling sleepy. Whatever the hindrance that arises, try to identify that hindrance and try to abandon that hindrance. Does that make sense? So everyone close your eyes. So sit comfortably and close your eyes. and tell yourself, tell your mind, for these next few minutes, I'm going to practice breathing meditation. For these next few minutes, there's absolutely nothing else I need to think about. I don't need to think about friends or family or relatives. All I have to focus on, all I have to think about is the breath. Now first, bring mindfulness to your posture. See how your head is placed. See how your shoulders are placed. See how your hands are placed. See how your feet are placed. Make sure your hands are comfortable. Make sure your back is straight. Then slowly bring mindfulness, bring your attention to your breath, either the tip of your nose or inside the roof of your nose. See the breath coming in and coming out. Don't forcefully breathe. Simply focus on the breath coming in and coming out. Let your breathing be natural. When there's a breath in, you can simply be aware there's a breath in. When there's a breath out, simply be aware there's a breath out. Now, as you meditate, all these outside thoughts will come into your mind. Simply identify them as a thought of sensual desire, a thought of ill will, a thought connected with dullness and drowsiness, a thought connected with restlessness and remorse, or a thought connected with doubt, and simply abandon that thought and come back to the meditation. So again, bring mindfulness to your breath and focus on your breath coming in and coming out. Again, if your mind is getting distracted, identify the type of thought it is and remove it. And bring your attention back to your breath. Keep bringing your attention to your breath. And remove all outside thoughts. Okay, you can slowly open your eyes. So that might have been difficult because we're not used to identifying the hindrances, and we're not used to understanding what kind of thoughts we're having. But as you practice this, as you practice seeing what kind of thoughts are arising, seeing what it is your mind is being affected by at that moment, then your practice will become easier. Then you can know for sure, without any suspicion in your mind, that this thought is a bother to me. This is a hindrance that's arisen in my mind. That way your progress in developing your minds will be much, much easier. And then once you have an understanding, you'll see these hindrances arise due to a cause. If I get rid of the cause, then this hindrance won't arise. If you get rid of that unwise consideration and the sign of the beautiful, a thought of sensual desire will never arise in you. It's impossible. Then if you keep abandoning the cause, then that effect will cease to be. Then as you practice this, that's why this comes forth. Why Kaya-nupassana? If someone is practicing that all day, he's suppressing the 5 hindrances. Vedana-nupassana, he's suppressing the 5 hindrances. Chitta-nupassana is occupying his mind. He's seeing what his state his mind is in, and he's constantly developing a wholesome state. So the whole time we've been suppressing the 5 hindrances. If someone's practicing that, so now you have an understanding of the 5 hindrances, and then once someone practices further, he understands these same 5 hindrances are within me, and they're within other people as well. These same hindrances are the same things that other people have. So then when you see other people, for example, last time we watched that clip of that mother and son, when you watch people, when you watch the news, you'll see, even if you see a news clip, okay, right now I've seen this news clip and a thought of ill will has arisen in me. Your mindfulness increases. You're able to grasp what your mind is thinking at that moment. Maybe you see something else, you see the next news clip, and it's thought of sensual desire. You're able to grasp that instantly. Maybe you see something else and then you think, oh, 5 years ago I did something like that too. And it's thought of remorse. You're able to grasp that. That helps you to become more mindful. It helps you to abandon unwholesome states and develop wholesome ones. Does that make sense? So, does anyone have any questions on what we've discussed so far? Shaka, you have any questions? Shubha? Everyone else? Mahindra, Manuja, Dhammadayada? Okay, then I'm going to assume there's no unanswered questions. Today we practice the Buddha's teachings, we practice meditation, we practice learning the 5 hindrances and practice Dhammanupassana. And we collected lots of merit. All the merit we collected in this way we share with all the devas. May all the devas rejoice in this merit. May they all provide righteous protection to all these lay devotees and their families. May all the devas have the good fortune to realize the Four Noble Truths and escape from this long journey of samsara. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We share all the merit we collected with our teacher, 𝗾𝗺 𝘾𝙤𝙣𝙣, with 𝗾𝗺 𝘾𝙤𝙣𝙣, with all the monks of Mahamevnawa, all the monks training in the Buddha's dispensation. May all the monks rejoice in this merit and be able to realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We share all the merit we collected with all these lay devotees and their loved ones. May all these lay devotees be happy, healthy, and well. May you all have long lifespan. May you all be able to realize the Four Noble Truths in this Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Everyone chant with me. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayang kamame bhante bhuri panya tathagata. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayang kamame dhamma sanditthika kalika. Kayena vacha chittena pamadena maya katang acchayang kamami sangha punyaketang anuttara. Sadhu, sadhu. I will chant a blessing for you all. Abhivadana silissa nichang vaddapachayino chattaro dhamma vaddanti ayuvanno sukham balang ayurarogya sampatti sagga sampatti mevacha ato nibbana sampatti minate samijjatu. May you all be happy, healthy, and well. Teruvan Saranai, Namo Buddhaya.
Ausra sons. May we chant the forgiveness stanza, sons.
Yeah.
Dear devotees, let's go to the floor and worshiping us. Hindrances. Okasa vandami bante maya katam punyang samina anumoditabbang
Sadhu sadhu anumodami.
samina katam punyang maihanda
Sadhu sadhu anumodite.
Sadhu sadhu anumodami okasa dwaratena katan sabbang acchayang kamatame bante
Kamami kamitabang.
okasa kamami bante dutiyampi okasa kamami bante tatiyampi okasa kamami bante.
May you all be happy, healthy, and well. Teruvan Saranai, Namo Buddhaya.